Your voice, your opinion, your community. Fact TV, free speech protected.
Everybody, welcome back. Thanks for being here again today. My name is Anina Hansen, and welcome to Voices of Monadnock, the show where it's all made up and the points don't matter. Every once in a while, that always plays in my head. I don't know why, when I start to say this. Oh, actually, this is not a comedy improv show or anything like that, but it is a fun time of gathering together to talk about people who live in the Monadnock region. Why the Monadnock region? Because this show is produced by Monadnock Family Services, where I work with the Trauma Responsive Monadnock program, and the Greater Monadnock Regional Chamber of Commerce. Mm-hmm. And I think those are all the times that I have to say Monadnock to get us started here. So, thank you so much, Julianna Dodson, for being here with us today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
A resident of the Monadnock region and very involved in stuff that's going on around here. So why don't you go ahead and tell me. I like to start with what brought you here. Are you a native or you arrived here? And if so, when and why?
Cool. Yeah. So I live in Westmoreland now. I moved to the Monadnock region in 2017.
Oh, okay.
I work in Keene right now. I'm with the Hannah Grimes Center for Entrepreneurship. And I moved here because my kid's dad worked in timber frame down south. And a lot of people don't know that Bensonwood in Walpole is sort of like the Ted Benson and his team revived timber frame in modern day America in the 70s. And he actually wrote a lot of books about timber frame. And so on our second wedding anniversary, we were in Charlottesville, Virginia, and we were just kind of like in this little antique shop. And he picked up a book written by Ted Benson about timber frame. And that's how he actually got into timber frame, was by reading that book. And we ended up coming to a Timber Framers Guild conference up here. I don't know, it was 10 years ago at this point, and kind of toured Bensonwood and got to know the area a little bit. And eventually, when we were ready to make a move, we were like, well, why not work for the person that, was kind of the inspiration to start this career to begin with. And so I was working in public accounting at the time. But 3.5 years ago, I started working for Hannah Grimes.
Okay.
Yeah, so we were in Keene in an apartment while we looked for a house, and then we bought a house in Spofford, and we're there for 5 years, and now we're in Westmoreland.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. And what do you think of the area?
Well, I actually love it. It was really funny because when we were having a yard sale to sell all of our stuff before we came up here, because, a lot of people are like, oh, you must have moved for CNS or you must have moved for something else. And it's like, nope, we had no money. Like, we had to sell everything to make the move. And so when we were doing that, a lot of people were stopping and just saying, like, oh, where are you moving? Why are you moving? And they were just, like, shocked when they found out we were moving up north. They were like, but it's cold up there, right? And we're like, yeah, we're aware. Like, and I actually love it because a lot of my life was spent in different places down south, and it's nice when you're like at the beach or something, but most people, you're just walking to your car, walking from your car to work, doing errands, and you're just like pouring sweat in the first 15 seconds you're out there.
So humidity.
Yeah. So I love it up here. Temperature wise, I love the community. I couldn't believe that there was a center for entrepreneurship here that was like so heavily focused on innovation, which was really exciting to me. No complaints. Plan to be here for a long time. So
nice. That's really cool. Well, and in being part of Hannah Grimes, you really have gotten into so much of like the creative heart of the whole Monadnock region here. I've also had as a guest on here Justin, who works in the marketplace.
Yes.
But you're over in the Center for Entrepreneurship.
Yep.
So tell us about that. What the difference is and what it is that you get to be part of there.
I would love to. Yeah, Justin's fantastic, and I love what the marketplace does for the community. So it's kind of like the whole way that Hannah Grimes got started was through the marketplace, and the ingredients that have kind of come together in different ways to start the marketplace and then the center and then Radically Rural and all these sort of evolutions have all been pretty similar. Our founder and executive director, Marianne Christensen, was living in Roxbury. She grew up in rural Minnesota, but lived in New York City for 7 years or so, working for Merrill Lynch, and then was like, I've got to get back to rural again, And so she was in Roxbury, and she was kind of doing two things at once. One was like researching the lives of the people who had owned the home before her. And then the other one was she was trying to make and sell soap. And when she was doing that, she was like, wow, there are no local marketplaces around here. And now, we have many different shops in our area that you can take homemade goods and sell them. But at the time, there really wasn't anything. She could ship them internationally. She could do other things, but there wasn't a local marketplace. And she was in a spinning group, like a wool spinning group, with other folks that you might know in the region, like Mary Islin, who is a well-known artist around here. And they were kind of all talking about how great that would be. And Mary Islin's paintings are still in the marketplace today. And so, yeah, the ingredients that kind of spur everything we do is, starting with Marianne and now everyone who's in the Hannah Grimes community is kind of like identifying a problem and then, okay, well, this is solvable. Like, who has solved it? Can we replicate that? Can we try to think of a solution and not just kind of wring our hands about
Right.
it? And so she started this local marketplace on Main Street. And kind of like the first couple years was realizing wow, I need skills, business skills. And so do the makers and growers who are coming to sell their goods here. And what can I do to help them get business skills, and myself too? So she started to run some programs out of the marketplace. So it was always a part of our DNA to not just provide market access, but also to help businesses grow, whether that growth it could be qualitative or quantitative growth. And then in 2006, there was the opportunity to purchase a business incubator that had failed, which is in our location now. And it had been many things before. It was originally late 1800s a carriage barn, and it was a garage, and it was the old YMCA, and then it was this business incubator. And so then she was able to kind of grow it to an entrepreneur support organization, a nonprofit, which technically owns the marketplace. So we work, very closely with the marketplace, and we consider what we have comprehensively to be, all pieces of the puzzle. So at the center itself, we have space as far as long-term office rentals. We have a co-working space. We have conference rooms that people can rent. And then we also have many different programs. Some folks will recognize our pitch program called Pitchfork.
Yeah.
We have business labs we run that are 8-week business courses, and we have a general one, but we also have some sector-specific ones as well, which are farm, food, and now childcare. We just ran our first home-based childcare one. And then we also just have, part of our, the ingredients that we use for everything we do is convening. So we do a lot of convening folks for various reasons. And so 18 years ago, it's actually 19. I figured out it was 19, but I only realized that a couple months ago. And now we've been marketing for so many years, the wrong year. So I don't really know what to do. I'm like, which year do we just bite the bullet and just jump it ahead a year? But anyway, so 19 years ago, we had our first annual convening. And at the time, I don't even remember what it was called, but Ted Benson was the keynote speaker, which is so
cool.
funny.
It's a great full circle.
Yeah. And so, but it became known as the Connect event. And every year, folks would get together to connect. And in 2000, during that event, there would be idea jams. There would be just brainstorms. There would be just connections that were made across sectors and across the region. And out of one of those events came the idea of small towns shouldn't be excluded from being able to host events just because they don't have a big convention center. You can actually use the whole downtown as a conference center, which is what Radically Rural does. So then in 2018, working with the Sentinel, we still do the Connect event as a part of Radically Rural, and anyone locally is welcome to come, even if they don't come to the whole summit. But it was kind of okay, if this has worked for us regionally, can this work nationally as well? And so that's kind of how Radically Rural got started. And I'm hoping that since this year is the first year that we're revisiting our original location of Allison's Orchard, I'm hoping that Ted has agreed to come say a few words and just kind of like bring us full circle to that. So, yeah.
Well, while you're talking about that, go ahead and describe a little bit more about Radically Rural itself, what that event is and what you seek to accomplish with it. Because I love this event.
Yes. And how many times have you been
Just
once?
last year was my first time. Yeah.
So that, just thinking about it, yes, I know. So that event convenes between 500 and 600 folks who either live, work, play in rural communities and are very interested in making sure that rural communities are seeking out contemporary solutions and working together on them, that they're vibrant, that they're equitable. So really just improving small communities and learning from each other, because it can feel sort of vague, but then if each of us thinks in our small town, so like you're in Peterborough, I'm in Westmoreland, I was in Spofford for 5 years, I still work on projects for them. One of the projects I work on in Spofford is a brownfields remediation, so like a chemical waste site that's just been sitting dormant for decades. And that didn't make sense to me. I was like, we should be able to figure this out somehow. And so I've been working on that for about 4 years with an amazing team. I'm not even in charge of it anymore, which is great. Like I just show up to the meetings now and do what I can do to help. And then I've probably got another 5 years to go on the project. But doing something like that, that's none of us are qualified to do. You know, we're just volunteers trying to improve our community. We realize that we might never have done this before, but other people have done this before in their communities. And so when we convene together, whether it's about brownfields remediation or it's about housing or childcare, whatever the issue might be, we're just better off creating that density and shaping and sharing ideas together so that none of us have to recreate the wheel and figure things out. You know, and that's kind of what we were talking about earlier with the trauma-informed Monadnock work.
Yeah.
You know, like if case studies like yours and other people who are trying to do this, if we can capture that and then share it freely, that puts other people years ahead of being able to do that. So that's really what it's all about. And we have 7 tracks that we have sessions on over 2 days. And so the tracks are clean energy, land use, arts and culture, Main Street, journalism, entrepreneurship, and health. And so we touch on any issue that's related to rural life. It could be how to get more volunteers. It could be anything, but those are kind of the tracks that we orient ourselves around. And it's pretty cool. We're now, we keep like spilling into like the day before and day after with little things because it's just grown so much and there's such a high demand for programmatic space, but the programmatic space is limited. And so we are going to do a documentary screening the night before this year as well. And then a little kind of a smaller gathering half day afterward for people who are interested in talking about what can be kind of a scary subject and a touchy subject. But I am interested in talking about, and so I'll tell you what it is. I'll leave you on a cliffhanger. But, you know, we're always telling people at Radically Rural, because we've got 500 to 600 people from all over the country. Every year, 40-something states in Canada, and sometimes other countries are represented. And of course, like a heavier number from those within driving distance, but really evenly distributed outside of that group of people. And so we have all these amazing people, and no one has to do this for their job. Like literally no one is like, this is part of your job. You have to go to Radically Rural every year. Like everyone who's there wants to be there, and they've chosen to be there, and they're taking the time and energy and resources to be there. But anytime we gather, like I tell them in the plenary sessions, I'm like, listen, organizing a gathering like this is so much work. Trust me. Like it takes us the entire year to plan it. If you need to convene a certain group for whatever reason, and you don't want to plan your own event, use our platform to do it. So you can use one of our venues. You can, you know, you're already going to be here anyway. Why go through the work? Like this is all about not duplicating efforts, right? And then it kind of struck me, because I've been thinking about this one topic a lot, and I'm like, I'd really like to convene some people to talk about this. And then I was like, wait, I could use our platform. Yes, exactly. So we're going to be talking about different ways to think about economic growth. So economic growth can be kind of a tricky subject, because anytime there's even like a whiff of like, wait, are you anti-capitalist? It can kind of spiral from there. And so we're using, like, there's lots of words you can use to talk about it, but what we know to be true, and this is sort of a framework that's put forward in a book called Donut Economics, but what we know to be true is that we live on a finite planet, so we have to live within our planetary boundaries. There's no choice about that. And we want to make sure that everyone has their needs taken care of, right? So if we can all agree on those two things, then it doesn't really matter what we call it. You can call it whatever you want, but we've got to live in the donut. So those are like the two kind of things.
Interesting. So we don't have to talk about economic growth. We can talk about what's it going to take for everybody to get their needs met. Yeah. I love that reframe.
Exactly. Because if you, there's like other books that I've read that kind of talk about it in different words, but I feel like the donut is so, and like I want to serve donuts when we meet, because,
How
but
could
like,
you not?
Yeah, exactly.
Really?
So the donut is so approachable, because it seems like most people could agree on that, right? Like we should.
Everyone loves donuts.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone can agree on donuts, and like, we should all live within our planetary boundaries, and we should all make sure that everyone's needs are met, and then we can start from there. And so I guess the broader umbrella term would be like heterodox economics, like as opposed to orthodox economics. Like we've been talking about it in this certain way for a really long time, but there's a lot that's not working about it. So does it really matter what we call it? Can we just figure out what's going to work and then do that? Because if we have this unending compound growth, and the health of our economy is always based on this unending compound growth of GDP, then that's not sustainable. Like that's literally impossible for us to continue to do.
And all people are not getting their needs met.
And all people are not getting their needs met. And so
that's our almighty goal.
Something's not working.
Yeah.
And so the reason that this is important to the work that we do in our region and the work that we're doing through Radically Rural is because this impacts everything we do. How are we measuring how our economies are doing? How are we measuring what are we reaching toward? And so there's just a lot for us to learn here in our region, because your work would be a part of it, know? And
exactly,
economy shouldn't just be about numbers and this and that. It should be about well-being, and it should be about distribution of resources and all this sort of stuff. So I just want to talk about it, and I don't know where we're going to land, but I was like, I'm sure there's other rural regions that are thinking about this too, about reframing a little bit. And could we just get us all together? Why not do it at Radically Rural? And so, we're going to, hopefully, we don't have anything on the schedule yet, but gather on Friday, and it's going to be super casual, like come in your pajamas if you want to, like curl up on a comfy chair on the floor or whatever, and eat some donuts, and let's talk about it, And I think what that will do is, because Hannah Grimes has gone through these various evolutions, to me, a really important part of how we do what we do moving forward is like we can introduce concepts in our business labs and in our existing programs that help business owners really rethink what a thriving business means and how to direct their efforts in a way that are in the donut, and then, in the marketplace, even like, how are we talking with our vendors about these issues? And so there's a lot that can kind of provide a good lens for us in what we do moving forward. But that's just an example of how this network works. And what's so great about all the different pieces is we have these hyper-local pieces, we have these regional pieces, and then we have these national pieces, and they all really work together very well to funnel amazing ideas and connections and resources and energy into our region. And it also is a perfect platform to share out what we're doing well, because we're doing a lot of things really well. So,
which is such an important piece too. I love you mentioning that, because it's very easy, you know, when we're talking about making anything better, it's very easy to be like, well, what's not good enough yet?
Yeah.
How do we get it up? Without saying, look at all the things that are fantastic. We've already done this really well, and people are succeeding so much at this. And it's a more fulfilling conversation when we bring in the acknowledgement of everything that is good. Like, let's look around our area. Look at all the things that are working great. Look at all the people that are helping other people.
Exactly.
And that sort of thing. But I love, too, you know, this idea of what I'm doing with trauma or adversity, as I often call it, just to make it feel a little more, you can get your head around. These are things that we don't talk about, you know, having these conversations, and just the conversation, like, we don't have to shoot for the whole, what's the solution? What are we going to do? Let's just talk about the issue to start with. Let's talk about what's going on that's great in the Monadnock region. And then let's talk about the adversity that people are looking at here. And I love, you know, hyperlocal, regional, national, these different ways of breaking it down. And how can we, by bringing business and economic growth into the conversation, talk about people's well-being in relation to how they've experienced adversity or are experiencing it now. I love blurring those lines like crazy, you know, not this whole business is over here and human development is over. No, there's no separating these things, really.
Absolutely connected. Because you think about, like, for example, if our entire world is focused on this relentless compound growth, right? That is what's keeping people in jobs that are running them ragged. If businesses over time and economies over time, our nation over time, can start to think about it a little differently, that growth can be deepening, it can be widening, it doesn't have to be just this upward trajectory all the time, then people maybe can take a breather every now and then. You know, they can take care of their families, they can take care of themselves, they can, and that affects everything, right?
It does. It's so important. You have to have that pause. It's the whole thing, like, you got to have winter before you can have the growth of spring.
Exactly.
And that's not part of our cultural conversation around the economy or anything like that. I'm so curious about what's the growth we could access if our culture stopped being like relentless performance, relentless achievement, and was like, let's all take a break. Let's work fewer hours. Because the evidence shows that you're more productive that way. Like, really getting our minds more up to date with these things.
Exactly. Because, you know, the conversation we were having before we started recording, you know, it's like, what would people do with their time if they didn't have to be working every hour of the day, right? They would be taking care of their aging parents. They would be being creative, maybe.
Planting gardens.
Yes, exactly. Stewarding the land, relationships with each other. I mean, the list just goes on. And that's good for everyone, for their health, for their well-being, for our world. And so there's so much to it that the conversation about economics, which sounds maybe boring to a lot of people, is actually like a driving force behind a lot. And so if we can start to think about it differently, talk about it differently, then that's key. And Hannah Grimes has always been kind of, especially for a rural region, you know, we pick up on weak signals. We see what's coming, and we might not be the first, but we're listening, we're paying attention, and we exist to be this tool, you know, that our region can use for whatever is needed at the time. And this is a needed thing right now. So it's something that I'm excited. It's not the only thing that's bubbling up at Hannah Grimes by any means. In fact, like, I'm probably the one that's the most excited about it. But, you know, there's plenty of new things that are coming around all the time for Hannah Grimes. And this just happens to be one. And it was a good example for how having the Radically Rural platform can be really beneficial, because if there's other rural regions that are thinking about these things, and we can put our heads together, we don't have to be alone in the journey. We can kind of work together, and maybe someone's a little further along than we are, because it's that whole idea of positive deviance. It's like, if you have 5 communities that have been given relatively similar conditions and problems, then who's figured it out?
Right.
And can we shape and share together and replicate it?
That's so exciting. I love it. And I love it because you're also like positioning the Monadnock region as a front runner, or, you know, we're taking this initiative and running with it and bringing everybody in. Like, we're doing it together. We're not doing it just for ourselves, but it is an area that this progressive development of the Monadnock region is really blazing a new trail.
Absolutely.
That can have a huge ripple effect. And I get excited with the potential for, let's bring in the human development side about people's adversity and what people have gone through, and that resilience of the human spirit. How do we tap into that more and make it a factor in this growth? Not just, we're lucky if we get it, but no, it's the driving force behind this. So much potential.
Truly, truly. And I will say that, speaking of what we do well, one thing that's highly relevant to our theme for Radically Rural this year and connects with that thought is that we have amazing social capital. And social capital is actually a field that was pioneered by someone who lives 20 minutes from here in Jaffrey, Robert Putnam. And he's a professor, he's a social scientist and professor at Harvard. He's an author, obviously, well, maybe not obviously. He wrote a book, Bowling Alone, in 2000 that was very well known. And then he wrote another book in 2020 called The Upswing with a woman named Shaylin Romney Garrett. And he pioneered this field talking about the crumbling of the social fabric and predicting that would continue if we didn't do anything about it. And guess what? It happened. Everything he predicted happened, which is very discouraging to him. Because he's like, if I predict it,
this is why I wrote the book, so it wouldn't happen.
Exactly, and it happened anyway. Why? But Shaylin was in his very first class, I think, that he taught, and so she's been working with him for the last 20 years. And co-authored this book with him. Well, both of them were convinced about the social capital of our area, so they both moved here. They both live here now.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so he lives in Jaffrey, she lives in Keene, and she moved from Utah, actually. And she's doing our closing session with us. And this concept of reweaving our social fabric and how that impacts everything we do in journalism, in health, in entrepreneurship, in everything, right? And how essential that work is going to be weaved throughout the whole summit. So the documentary we're screening the night before is Join or Die, which is about Robert Putnam's work and what he suggests we do. And then Shaylin's doing the closing with us. And I am just so excited about it. And social capital is something we do really well. So
that's so great. Yeah. What we have done really well is talk, because we're out of time. That's never happened before. But since this ended up being such a rah-rah, radically rural thing, what's the website if people want to know more about participating?
www.radicallyrural.org.
Awesome. Yeah. Julianna, thank you so much for being
welcome.
here. This
thank
was
you for having me.
The bare minimum of what we could have talked about. I know. Thanks. It was great. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in to be here, part of this show today. And I look forward to seeing you again next week.